Continue on with our KTRS Sports Show special brought to you by Worldwide Technologies and St. Louis Professional Outdoor Soccer Team kicking off in 2015. I'm Jim Hewer back at Washington University. We now turn it over to Michael McCambridge for our special event.
And within a couple of years, the Cosmos were selling out NFL's Giant Stadium, and they were the face of a league that unfortunately had several other franchises. And even as the Cosmos were selling out in New York, the St. Louis Stars were struggling to sell out across campus at Francis Field. At the dawn of the 1980s, Phil Woosnam, the commissioner of the NASL, predicted that within 20 years it would eclipse the National Football League in popularity. That would become a moot point 4 years later when the NASL folded, awash in debt and bad management. The U.S. got another chance at the beginning of the 90s when it won the rights to host the World Cup and staged that tournament more successfully and prosperously than had ever been done before. Following in the footsteps of the World Cup was Major League Soccer, which launched in 1996 with a great deal of optimism, lots of glitzy marketing, and many, many bad team nicknames. By the end of the 90s, the league was being propped up by two men, Lamar Hunt and Philip Anschutz, who just refused to let it die. At the beginning of the 2000s, we saw the beginning of the growth of soccer-specific stadiums in the U.S. and hope that the league had finally turned a corner. Then the U.S. crashed out of the World Cup in 2006, and the revolution that was supposed to come as soon as David Beckham walked on the field in 2007 failed to materialize. TV ratings were still poor, and people started to wonder if it was ever going to happen. Now, in 2014, here we are again. Thanks largely to the growth of not only soccer-specific stadiums, but an indigenous soccer supporter culture, MLS is more prosperous than ever. Its attendance figures are on par with the NBA and the NHL. This next World Cup, once again, is going to have more tickets sold to the U.S. than any other visiting nation. The English Premier League has become a staple of American sports fans' Saturday mornings. And, perhaps most surprisingly, EA Sports FIFA is now outselling John Madden's football among the youth set. An ESPN survey 2 years ago ranked soccer as the second most popular sport among the 12 to 24-year age group. So it seems a good time, a month before the World Cup, to ask, is soccer finally about to arrive? Is the United States finally going to be a soccer country? We have four distinguished guests who won't need much of an introduction, so I'm going to keep this short. To my far right, Taylor Twellman. If ever there was an American who came from good soccer stock, it was Taylor. Both his father and two of his uncles played in the NASL. Taylor was a star here at St. Louis U High before going to college at Maryland and enjoying a prosperous MLS career. He was the 2005 MLS MVP and then went on to what is becoming a very successful second career as an analyst for ESPN. To my immediate right is Dan Flynn, Secretary General of the U.S. Soccer Foundation since 2000. He oversees the day-to-day operations of the umbrella organization that runs the U.S. men's national team and U.S. women's national team, as well as the organization that promotes soccer around the country. His St. Louis roots also run deep, with him having spent more than a decade with Anheuser-Busch Sports Marketing and being inducted to the St. Louis University Sports Hall of Fame. To my left is Grant Wahl. Few writers have traveled further or written more authoritatively about the game than Grant. He was also responsible for something that was at the time unique in American literature, which was a book about soccer on the New York Times bestseller list. His book, The Beckham Experiment, was a hit in 2007, and as a writer for Sports Illustrated, he is the best known and arguably the best soccer writer in the country. Finally, to my far left is Clark Hunt, part of one of the first families of American sports. His father, Lamar, helped start not one but two soccer leagues. As chairman of the Hunt Sports Group, Clark is responsible for both the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL and FC Dallas of Major League Soccer. Significantly, his involvement with the game goes beyond merely a business matter. He was the team captain of a very strong SMU team that played in St. Louis in the 80s. So thank you, gentlemen, for coming here. We're going to talk. We're going to talk a lot tonight about the present and the future of soccer in America, but I want to begin the questions by asking you each about the past. What, in your own experience, has been the low point in your involvement with American soccer? The point when you most doubted that this sport was ever going to break through in America? Let me start with the far left with Clark.
Well, as Michael alluded to, our family first got involved with professional soccer in the late 60s with the North American Soccer League through my dad's ownership of the Dallas Tornado. And he hung with it, as was his personality, about as long as the league survived, all the way into the early 80s. And then I think we clearly went into a dark age between the early 80s and the World Cup coming to the U.S. in '94. Probably all my father had to look forward to from a soccer standpoint during that time was me playing at SMU, and that was pretty low level, at least my play was. I think that time period was very difficult, and I can remember how excited he was when the U.S. was awarded the World Cup, because he knew that it would be a catalyst for reigniting the passion for the sport here in this country and hopefully leading to a pro league, which of course it did.
All right. Grant?
I think it's a sign of how far the sport has come that I really haven't had a horribly low point that I've been involved with soccer in America. I really started following it as a fan in 1990 when the U.S. got into the World Cup for the first time in 40 years. And the U.S. has been in every World Cup since. So that's something that very few countries in the world can say. So if I had to pick one, I guess I would say 98 World Cup in France, where the team didn't perform well and also imploded, off of the field and looked bad doing so. But honestly, if that's the worst, then that's not
the
bad,
best
huh?
for you in the media world, by the way.
You
When
know?
a team implodes, that's pretty good for you.
Dan, what about you?
There's actually two times. One, they're both business related. The demise of the NASL, I was had come through St. Louis U and was in the business world, working for Anheuser-Busch and supporting the league. And so I was pretty close to the meetings at the end and seeing the demise of it, just knowing that the next generation of players really weren't going to have anything to look forward to. So that was a low point. The other, in my current job, was when Don Garber had to place the call, and we cut two franchises out of Florida. That was an interesting time. But I will say, as low as that was, I thought the plan that Clark, Lamar, and everybody put together with Phil Anschutz clearly gave, on a low note, a sense of hope as well. So that one's tweaked a little bit. But both of those were big low points for me.
All right. Taylor, what about you?
I appreciate Dan bringing up Tampa and Miami folding, because the next day I signed with the league. So I don't know if that was part of the lowest point or I don't know. It's interesting. Growing up in St. Louis, being a part of an NASL family, as I describe it, my dad and I, with my brother, were having dinner last night. I find it amazing that we went through such a period of not having the United States in the World Cup. And it was during the time of the NASL. So for me, as a historian of the league and really appreciating, and I joke around with my partner in crime, Alexi Lawless, a lot of us think the World Cup in soccer started in this country in '94. That's not true. Soccer's been around in this country for a long time. We just had a little dark age. But I will say this. I have a funny feeling that we may look back at Major League Soccer and U.S. Soccer 20, 30, 40 years from now as this being the low point of where this sport is growing, the way this sport is going. We may actually say, on May 5th, 2014, that was pretty low. Look at where we are now.
There's a hopeful take. Now, let me run down the line again and ask this question. Obviously, and we've alluded to some of these, there have been a confluence of factors that have come together in the past 10, 15 years. You could point to the beginning of soccer-specific stadiums with Crew Stadium opening in '99. You could point to the latest NBC contract with MLS, the signing of David Beckham. There have been a lot of things that have gone right for soccer over the past 15 years. I would be interested in the opinion of each of you on what has been the single most important for soccer's growth in America and why. Clark, you want to start?
Yeah, and there are a lot of things I could point to. You alluded to soccer-specific stadiums, and I clearly think that's been very important, at least to the success of Major League Soccer, the success over the last 10 or 15 years. But I think I would point to the growth in the fan base. And it's not all been generated by Major League Soccer. It's come from a lot of different directions. We truly are a soccer nation. There's a segment of our population who really, really enjoys the sport at many different levels. And Major League Soccer, the U.S. national team, et cetera, would not be having the success they are if it was not for that fan base.
I guess I would say a couple of things. One, and Taylor alluded to this, is that the NASL didn't produce a lot of international level American players, and it also didn't leave an infrastructure of stadiums in a way that MLS has for a long time now. So for me, that's a huge part of it. And when I talk about infrastructure, I think I include fan infrastructure as well.
Yep.
And certainly there were some leftovers. I live in New York, and people still talk about the Cosmos and how the Red Bulls aren't the Cosmos. But for the most part, I look around at Seattle and Portland, and they have a huge mass of fans, of hardcore American soccer fans that have taken the fandom to a new level. And I look where I'm from in Kansas City, which is almost even more impressive to me because they went from having a pretty small fan base to a fan base that sells out, I think, their 41st consecutive game the other day. And so that's possible to do that in MLS markets. And so I guess I look at that as part of the infrastructure, if you include human infrastructure.
All right. Dan?
I think it's really hard to pinpoint one or two things, but being that's the question, I would say committed ownership. Mainly, if I look at the last 20 years or so, it would be Major League Soccer ownership. It's different than the NASL ownership. I can tell you, Taylor, to your point, well, we didn't qualify or didn't play in the World Cup. I mean, one of the big reasons we've continued to qualify really is because of MLS. And not only just the owners, but it's the cooperation. Mm-hmm. When we need to play a game in Mexico, the coach wants to play an extra game. It's not a FIFA date, getting players released. Working with the league is actually very, very positive. And it does carry over to not only the message, but the product on the field. The second thing I would say is others have talked about the fan connection. I think there's an emotional connection that our sport offers that's very different, and we're now capturing that. And I think the league has actually expanded a number of footprints where people can actually see how to be a fan and learn how to be a fan and then carry it out. And they're there week in, week out. That has probably done more than anything. That doesn't happen without committed ownership, so they really do go hand in hand.
So Clark says fandom. You're talking fandom. Dan's talking fandom. And that's literally what it is. It's the education of the fan. Because I remember playing high school soccer in this city. If I brought up the Liverpool Crystal Palace, which I am going to, even though I say a Liverpool, how many people saw Liverpool Crystal Palace? How many people now can say they can watch any MLS game they want to on MLS Live or on NBC or ESPN that's really the sport's grown tremendously, even in my lifetime, of the access and the fan being educated. But the most important thing for MLS and U.S. Soccer for me is the American player, because that's where NASL got it wrong. Only having 3 American players per roster, per team, that doesn't work. This league was founded in the United States of America, and it's very important that that league continues to grow, because as it grows, there's still going to be that dilemma now. Is this a business? What's the foundation? And I still think that needs to go in that direction. So what Grant was talking about is how important the American player is.
Good point. Now, one thing that you can't help but notice is the growth of soccer has come in the face of this deeply entrenched resistance, and in some case, outright hatred for the sport. Let me just cite a couple of voices. Jack Kemp, speaking before the U.S. Congress, said, I think it is important for all those young out there who someday hope to play real football, where you throw it and kick it and run with it and put it in your hands. A distinction should be made that American football is democratic capitalism, whereas soccer is a European socialist sport. Now, you could say that was a remnant of the Cold War, but no less a contemporary essayist than Chuck Klosterman has said, and I quote, I would sooner have my kid deal crystal meth than play soccer.
Have you seen Breaking Bad, though? It's a pretty good show. I'm not gonna...
We have all heard the jokes, you know, why do so many kids in America play soccer so they don't have to watch soccer? We've seen the resistance. What do you attribute that vociferous response from the haters? Let me start this time with you, Taylor. Where does that come from?
Good.
And what does it mean?
Person with the lowest IQ on the panel. Thank you for that. Whew. I played all sports. I dealt with all the jokes, whether it was in the on the baseball diamond, whether it was on the basketball court, whether it's on the golf course. A lot of it is a ignorance because they don't understand the sport. And a lot of it is because of, if you talk to my generation or younger, that's not, you don't hear those comments, but you hear it from the older generations because, quite frankly, the sport wasn't around. But I laugh because there still isn't, Grant may agree with this to a certain extent, there's a complex within the soccer fans now that fans are so, this is ours now. So if you want to make fun of it, we always kind of feel like we have to defend it. But now I feel like it's changing a little bit where you're like, well, you know what? Screw it. You don't want to be part of our group? Then you're not part of the group. But coming down to it, it's an ignorance of not understanding the sport. And that's pretty much what I've dealt with my whole career in asking or being asked, why'd you play soccer over baseball? Or why'd you play soccer? But my generation or younger, I don't hear any of those comments anymore. I don't.
It's pretty much what Dan dealt with this morning on his radio interview.
It was me calling in.
I would tweak Taylor's comments a little bit. I think it's generational ignorance. And so I think you're right, Taylor. I think the younger generation, you don't hear that. I think the exposure of TV, I think there's something like 2,900 games that you could watch last year across all the top leagues in this country. So I think it's generational ignorance. And to me, I don't think we have to apologize to anybody. I don't. And I think it should serve as a great motivation. I kind of like the quiet motivation, go about, grind it out every day, which I think is what we have to do in our sport. But let the fans be loud, let the fans speak their minds, and I think that's the best approach, at least from a U.S. soccer point of view. But I would say generational ignorance.
All right. Grant?
I just think it takes a long time for cultures to change. And I've been covering soccer at Sports Illustrated since 1996, so that's 18 years. And during that time, the changes that I've seen in how the culture here views the sport are immense. And I do see 70 to 80 live soccer games on U.S. television every week from around the world. You see, as you mentioned, more people have bought World Cup tickets from the United States than any other country in the world outside of the host country. The biggest television rights fee for the World Cup comes from the United States. So the culture has already changed. And when you look at it in those terms, and I think when you add up all of the interest in all the forms of pro soccer in this country, I think it's as big or bigger than ice hockey at this point, if you talk about just comparing sports. So if people still exist, some older generation folks who want to take shots at the sport, I kind of let them, but I certainly don't care, and I don't think many soccer fans here do either.
All right. Clark?
I'm with Dan on it, and just to echo some of the comments, it's been generational. When Major League Soccer started, I was 30 years old, and I was really part of the first group of youngsters that played the sport in Dallas, where I grew up. And I know that might have been different here in St. Louis because St. Louis has had such a great soccer culture for so long. But I was 30 years old. I didn't have any children at that point. Well, now we've moved forward 19 years. I have 3 kids, and I love taking my kids to Major League Soccer games. And I'm passing down that passion to the next generation. And I think the media going back 15, 20 years, a lot of them didn't grow up with the sport. They didn't understand it, and therefore they resisted it. Clearly, with the 2 guys we have here who are quite enlightened, they really love the sport. One of them played at a very, very high level, and so we're getting that shift. It's just taken a long time.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to open it up a little bit. I've got a few questions for specific members of the panel, and after they answer, I would invite anybody else in the panel to chime in, agree, disagree. Let me start with you, Grant. This year we've seen MLS expansion franchises awarded to Miami and Atlanta, commonly considered 2 of the worst sports cities in America. After the MLS's earlier problems in the Southeast, how optimistic are you about the prospects of developing the same kind of indigenous culture there that we see in Kansas City or the Pacific Northwest?
I certainly have questions. I started as an intern at the newspaper in Miami back in the mid-'90s, and all sports there essentially have had trouble drawing fans at different times. That's just Miami. Atlanta, sort of similar, and yet I think if MLS wants to be a national league, they need to be in the Southeast. And there's this huge vacuum for several years now where there's no team in the Southeast. Atlanta is a gigantic market. Miami is a place that I think could be very different with David Beckham running things. And
because he'll be there all the time?
No, but I think he's actually putting more of his own skin in the game than people think. My sense is that the failure in Miami before was due in part to several decisions made and the ownership not being, in my opinion, as much of a heavy hitter as other MLS owners and not being willing to take the losses that other MLS owners took. So if anyone's going to make soccer MLS work in Miami, I think it's Beckham and a smart team around him. I don't think it's a slam dunk, though. And I do think when you look back, Seattle wasn't a slam dunk either. People like to think that Seattle from the start was going to be this rampaging success. I lived in Seattle in the early 2000s when a team called Seattle Sounders drew 2,000 fans per game in minor league soccer. So like Taylor, I've got questions about Atlanta. I've got some questions about Miami, but I'm not going to write them off. I think MLS needs to be in the Southeast.
Technically, is Miami, Clark, completely awarded?
No.
No, technically I don't think so, right?
These guys clearly know what's going on, so I'm not going to counter that. But we're very hopeful that we will have a team in Miami. And we didn't mention we have a team in Orlando.
Orlando as well.
Launching next year. So it'll really give the league a great presence in the Southeast, which I think is important because you're exactly right. We've had a big hole there. And those are important populations. They're big populations, and there are a lot of soccer fans in Miami.
Well, and the white elephant in the room, the large elephant in the room in Major League Soccer is television ratings. For some reason, I come across everyone in this country that will say they're a U.S. soccer fan, yet they're not a Major League Soccer fan, which makes absolutely no sense. When Clint Dempsey, Michael Bradley, Landon Donovan, Omar Gonzalez, Matt Beasley, I'll go down the line, Graham Zusi will all be at the World Cup. I don't understand that. But, Grant, it's funny because you and I have had conversations and many beers over this, yet when you look at television ratings for U.S.-Mexico games, Miami and Atlanta are in the top 4 or 5 every single time. And it's interesting to me. I'm very skeptical. I'm on the record, and I'll go on the record now. I think Miami is a very long shot because I think you have to have a stadium. You have to have the right kind of players there. Atlanta, I believe in because of Arthur Blank. I don't agree with playing in a football stadium, cutting it down to 29,000 seats, playing on artificial surface. I grew up when the Atlanta Braves won 13 straight division titles. They couldn't draw anyone until the playoffs came, but they have an owner. And what I saw in that press conference is the only thing that, while I'm still skeptical, I think it can work because I think Arthur Blank will make it work if he has to go down swinging. But he's only got 3 designated player slots. You know, his entire team can't be Latino or Mexican, so he's going to have to figure that out because when Mexico plays Nigeria down there, it sells out, and everyone on Twitter will tell us, oh, well, look at what they do for those games. Well, I'm not going to compare a Mexico national team game to when Colorado Rapids come to town on a Saturday night. But I think Orlando is the one that's going to work because they're going to build a stadium. They're going to build it. It's going to be popular. The color scheme, everything about being a fan is going to be cool. I think Orlando is going to work.
Clark, you know well the problems with atmosphere of just selling tickets to the lower bowl of a big football stadium. What are your concerns with the Atlanta situation?
Well, first of all, I would echo Taylor's comments about Arthur Blank. Just having had the chance to work with him in the NFL, he is a tremendous owner. And he has the passion for the game. He has the financial resources. He, ironically, I think, became a soccer fan through his children. We were talking about generations ago and sort of a reverse order there. And he truly is passionate about the sport. Their downsizing plan for that stadium is completely unique. I've never seen anything like it, and it will have the effect of making the building feel like a 25 to 30,000 seat soccer stadium, as opposed to a 70,000 seat football stadium that you've put some tarps in the upper deck, which has been the previous way you downsize. So I think the stadium's going to have some advantages in terms of how it's designed. And I would also just point out that within a few weeks of the announcement, they had over 9,000 season ticket deposits, which is higher than any MLS team to date, including Seattle. So I think that bodes well for at least the start they're going to.
But how do they keep them interested until 2017? It's interesting now, right? You make the announcement now. For 3 years, you got to be interested in your product a little bit.
Yeah, well, part of that's execution. And I think if you look at the Sounders, their execution was fantastic. You're right. It's easy to look at Seattle now and think, well, it was always going to be a slam dunk, but it wasn't. And we were concerned about exactly the same things. A big football stadium that really you can't downsize.
Right.
And are we going to go in there and this is going to be, a repeat of what we did in '96 when we played in so many football stadiums? Well, their execution from a fan and marketing standpoint was absolutely brilliant. And they more or less filled up their capacity, 30-some-odd thousand from day one, and they've maintained it.
Taylor, I would add, I actually think because of social media and I think your ability to connect, it's a long runway. But I think because of the way you communicate today, I think you had a much better chance of success, staying plugged in, touching the emotional points of a fan base.
Okay.
If 9,000 have committed, as Clark has stated, That's a very strong beginning, and it is execution. They're going to have to find very creative ways to do it, but I think it is actually doable.
All right. Next question for Dan. I was in New York in 2010, about a month before FIFA announced the awards of the World Cup bids for 2018 and 2022. And I was doing an interview with your colleague, Sunil Gulati. And at the end of the interview, I asked him, how do you feel? Are we going to get it? And he said something that I thought was a little bit surprising at the time, but made a lot more sense later. He said, I think if the process is fair and above board, we have a good Now,
so what are you asking me?
I'm getting there. I think it was, it's probably an exaggeration to say that bidding process was the most corrupt in the history of sports, but it doesn't seem like a huge exaggeration. My question to you would be, not just in your position, but as somebody who cares about and loves soccer, do you have any reasonable optimism that corruption is going to be eliminated within FIFA in the next 10, 20, 30 years? And if so, I have to ask how.
Right. Well, it's a simple subject in some ways, and it's very difficult in other ways. Of that vote, I believe there's 12 or 13 of those members that are no longer on the FIFA Executive Committee. That's a positive step. There are a lot of, real investigations going on with real people doing the investigation, but nobody's going to kid anybody. Excuse me. The international governing bodies, not just in our sport, in other sports, it's a challenging landscape. I think we're better positioned today with Sunil being a FIFA Executive Committee member. I think the way the league is performed, the kind of ownership that we have, I think sends a really positive message. The TV rights, it's for 2 World Cups. I think the total TV rights is $1.1 billion. As Grant mentions, the largest TV rights in all of the world, if you will, for the World Cups. So if soccer and business decisions are made, there will be change. If the shenanigans, I just don't think that the shenanigans can continue due to the business principles and the business challenges that are going to be faced by FIFA. And I think the players as well. I think the players are, as a group, a little tired of seeing some of the shenanigans as well. They're not pleased to be playing potentially in very hot weather and all of that. And so I ultimately do think that there's progress that has been made. And that's not taking the high road. You have to be a little patient because it's tricky. And the fact that we want to be, we just signed the COPA. Keep in mind the people that we had to negotiate to bring that and host that here are some of the same people that we have to deal with at FIFA. So the landscape is very unique. So you can't just turn your face to them and say, I'm not going to deal with you anymore. We have to find a better way. We want to do it honestly. We want to do it by U.S. standards, which is challenging. It's difficult. But I believe you just have to you got to grind it out. You got to be truthful about it and put your best business principle. If you look at the world, FIFA's got two big geographic areas, U.S., the developed, and China. And I think that's got to drive the decisions, no matter how they get to those decisions. If you're FIFA and you're taking a step back and you're talking about multinational companies, they have a say in this. They don't have much of a say now, but they're going to have a greater say. It's the U.S., the development of that marketplace commercially in China will make FIFA's value triple, quadruple, whatever number you want to put on it. So they have a vested interest. It's a matter of getting through some of their, I think, cleansing.
Cleansing.
It's about changing a culture,
Yeah.
like we were talking about earlier, and it does take a little while. FIFA talks a lot about how it's reforming, and I think Sunil, as a member of their reform committee, has been a part of that. And I feel badly for him sometimes because I think he has to hold his nose to work with some of these people at FIFA. But if you're going to be part of change, you have to do it within the system. I wish FIFA reform were happening more quickly. I don't really expect the investigation that could be released before the next World Cup here to to have any smoking guns from everyone I've spoken to. And actually, I look at that day when the U.S. lost to Qatar in the final round of the vote. If I was going to pick maybe one other low point of my time covering, was just how shady and slimy and reptilian the whole thing felt like to be on site.
How do you spell reptilian?
It was so wrong. The whole thing felt wrong, and not just for the 22 vote, by the way. Right. So I guess we'll see how FIFA does in the next few years. I'm not convinced that it's inevitable that it's going to get totally clean, but I think it's possible, I guess. We'll see.
Clark or Taylor, anything to add?
No, I just wish I got an envelope.
I don't know that I have much to add other than I think it has to come back to the United States just from an economic standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big part of the reason why the Cup came here in '94 at a time when many people felt there's no way this country is ready to support a World Cup. And sure enough, we sold more tickets than any country ever had for the World Cup. Every game was sold out pretty much, and FIFA understands that. And the explosion in the rights fees is not lost on them. If you just go back about 15 years ago when Major League Soccer, in partnership with some other people, bought the TV rights for 2 World Cups for $40 million, right, and talk about the growth to $1.1 billion in that time period, it blows your mind. And it says a lot about where the sport has come in this country. But that 1.1 can grow by multiples, and that'll get FIFA's attention.
All right. Taylor, you're next up. As is well known, your own career was cut short by head injuries. We're at a time now in sports when there is increasing awareness of repetitive head trauma, not just in football, but in all sports. We're also beginning to see some scholarship that suggests that it's not just the concussive impact of heads banging against each other in the mixer, but just the repetition of thousands of times heading the ball that could cause long-term damage. If this turns out to be the case, if this is substantiated, does the sport have to change, and if so, how?
It's a very, this is every day of my life. My life, August 30th, 2008, changed forever, for the better. Some people will say it's a curse, but it was a blessing because I get to speak about what many of us didn't know about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. My life's completely changed forever. I haven't worked out in 5 years. I very rarely can't go to a movie in a theater, can't go to concerts, and I deal with that. Did I have a concussion, or do I have my permanent brain damage because of heading soccer balls? The answer is no. Do we know that? There is scholarship, there is writing, there is articles. We need substantial data. We need collective data before we say heading a soccer ball causes permanent brain damage and traumatic brain injuries. But I will leave everyone with this. When you go to a under 9, under 10, under 11, under 12 girls or boys game, how many times do they head the ball? Count next time you're there. Count how many times those kids head the ball. They don't. What's their first reaction when you throw them a head ball? They move. And so coaches, parents are saying, no, put your elbows out, open your eyes, let the ball hit you right square in the head. I still think our game can change. We talk about culture of change within FIFA, within Major League Soccer, within our community. Our sport can change with traumatic brain injuries and preserve our youth and still become better soccer players. When I was traveling in Europe doing a couple U.S. games, I would make it a point to go watch youth. They never practice heading the soccer ball. But for my first year after retiring, I wasn't doing television. I followed a bunch of people. I go to youth soccer training in this country, and they'd spend over 20 minutes heading a soccer ball. We're talking 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids. But everywhere around the world, the ball's on the ground. You're becoming better with your feet. I've had great discussions with Brendan Shanahan, the NHL, and his people about eliminating check checking. So to answer your question, there will be data in the next 3 to 5 years from the doctors I've talked about that will show that maybe hitting a soccer ball before a certain age isn't the smartest thing. But that doesn't mean our game's going to suffer, because there's going to be a byproduct. If our kids at 9, 10, 11 aren't hitting the ball, they still can become better soccer players. Their brains grow, which is what science has shown us, and then heading will come. But I don't think FIFA will ever outlaw heading, if that's what your next question is going to be. I don't see it coming.
I just am struck by, when I see a game from Europe, how far behind they seem to be on treatment of head injuries during a game.
Just follow me on Twitter.
Yeah. And that situation at Spurs,
Lloris
was just one of many this year where they sent the goalkeeper back on the field, and it was clear that
Rub some dirt on it.
Yeah, it was putting his health at risk, clearly.
Dan or Clark, anything to add?
I think I would just add, from a Major League Soccer standpoint, it's certainly something that we're tuned into. And obviously the NFL, it's something that the league has grappled with for several years. And at the end of the day, for both leagues, it has to be about player safety. Taylor mentioned that we don't have the data that we need at this point in order to say, okay, heading is something that shouldn't happen. But if we ever get to that point, I can say that Major League Soccer will lead the charge to say, hey, we need to take heading out of the sport.
Yep.
I think you're probably right. FIFA, like on most things, will move very, very slowly, and maybe we have to take a leadership role in causing that reform.
Which we are, Clark, and that's to Grant's point. Lloris gets a concussion in a Tottenham game. AVB comes out and says, no, he was fine. He gave smelling salts and all that. But the reality is behind the scenes, I get 3 emails, and I won't say from who, that are very close to that situation saying, what do we need to do to get better? So just follow. Next time I tweet, if you follow me on Twitter, watch the Twitter stream. It is. Yeah, if you guys don't know me, it's @TaylorTwelman on Twitter. Good. And I'll tweet a concussion. We still have so many people saying take 2 Tylenol and have orange juice. And 90% of them in our sport are not American.
Mike, I would add a couple things. At the national team level, they are tested, so there's a baseline at every camp for every player, and it's continued. And we've just hired a chief medical officer for U.S. Soccer to better coordinate all of this information, the data that's coming in. And we're working very closely with Major League Soccer as well. In fact, Clark, I don't know if you know, but I think it's May 29th, the White House is convening a symposium on concussions and whatnot. I think Don is supposed to present or speak to it. And so it's a big subject for us. We think hiring the chief medical officer is a very positive step as well.
All right. Clark, question for you. The single entity system in Major League Soccer, in which all contracts are signed with the league, all teams observe a salary cap for non-designated players, has, I think everyone agrees, been a crucial bedrock to the league's success. But I'm curious, how does the league take the next step to fulfill Don Garber's vision that within 20 years or another generation, it becomes a competitive league that's able to deal with some of the strongest leagues in the world? How does it do that when the leagues you would be competing with do not have to observe those same financial strictures?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on what you're trying to create. If you're trying to create a league where 2, 3, 4 teams realistically at the beginning of the season are the only ones that can win that league, then our structure won't allow that. Our structure was modeled after the National Football League and to a lesser extent the NBA, and probably today resembles the NBA more in that you're allowed to go above the salary budget for designated players.
Yep.
And I think that's one of our great strengths, and I think it's one of the things that will let us be one of the best leagues in the world. We're going to have a system where every team can compete. Ultimately, what's going to allow us to have better players is the growth in the sport and the financial resources that'll bring to the league. And we firmly believe that a league with a salary budget that allows all the teams to succeed is going to grow faster from a financial standpoint than a league where there are 2, 3, or 4 teams who every year and the rest of them are out of luck.
I think, too, I mean, it's something where the salary cap, if you want to call it, is pretty low right now for each team in MLS, but there's no reason that cap can't go up. NFL has a salary cap. And so one thing I find interesting about MLS is, unlike other leagues even in this hemisphere, like even Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, those leagues don't aspire to be among the best leagues in the world at some point. And so then the question becomes, how do you go from a feeder league to a destination league? And that has always intrigued me. How long does that take? Don Garber says straight up publicly that by 2022 he wants MLS to be one of the best leagues in the world, right?
Yep.
So to do that, a lot needs to happen in the next 8 years. And so I'm curious to see how that process goes, but I think getting some of the top players from the U.S. national team, like Dempsey and Bradley, back into the league shows that's a sign of a league that is slowly becoming a destination league.
And yet at the same time, you've got a manager for the U.S. national team whose bias seems to be to have players play over in Europe at the top level of competition.
And that's part of the challenge is, but if you're Michael Bradley and someone offers to pay you 5 times what you're making in Italy, I'm not saying no to that.
I could hardly.
I would have walked from Italy.
Taylor, do you think it's realistic to that MLS is going to be able to compete with the big leagues with the present economic structure that exists, or will there have to be more?
Well, it's a good. I mean, you're talking about someone where that single entity structure. I had an opportunity to go play in England. Had a $3 million offer from Preston North End, and the single entity came and they said no. So you're talking about someone that's seen both the positive and I've seen the negative. This league's not around if we didn't have single entity. So if anyone wants to say that we didn't have single, we should have come out right away, promotion, relegation, all that. This league's not around. I will say this. The way this league's going and the way I see great owners like the Hunt family, Arthur Blank coming in, if we have 40 legit owners in this league, I wouldn't mind seeing a little promotion, relegation, 2-league system on a personal level. Because I think, and you're talking about someone where, ESPN, we have to find a way to get these television ratings up. That's the white elephant. So, Grant, I'm with you. If our salary cap's $100 million, well, fine, I don't care. But the only way to get a $100 million salary cap is for you to watch every MLS game, and you can hit mute when I'm talking. I get that. Just have it on your TV. But I'm serious. Salary cap's fine if the number's high enough. My personal goal is for us to be a better league than Liga MX. I've told Don Garber this. I don't care about Europe. They've got a 100-year head start on us. But if we are better than Liga MX, I'm in. I want those players playing there because there's a lot of good players to come here and play here. But I'm just saying, maybe I'm throwing candy out. If we have a league of 16 teams and 14 with 40 committed owners with good money behind them, I don't know, maybe promotion, relegation. But I'm talking 40, 50 years down the road, I think.
Yeah, I'm assuming that buyers who come into MLS for, I think the Columbus price was $68 million or thereabouts, did not sign up so they could someday be relegated to a second-class league.
No.
Sure, and that's one of the tough dynamics because people do say, wouldn't it be so interesting? It would make what's going on at the bottom of the table interesting at the end of the season, just like it is in the Premier League if you had that. The flip side is the economic devastation of getting relegated, particularly in the U.S. at this point, I think is unrealistic. On that, I don't think you can say we're never going to do that because, 40 years from now, this sport will have grown leaps and bounds. But the comments are exactly right. We've got to get more financial resources into the league. And those financial resources will be plowed back into the teams, and the teams will get better. And it's just going to take time. But I think everybody agrees that today the talent level is much better than it was 10 years ago. And for me, that's the litmus test. It's 5 years from now, the talent level needs to be better. And 5 years after that, it needs to be better. We need to keep getting better, and we will, at one point, pass Mexico in terms of the quality of play. Obviously, getting to the level that you see in Europe is a long-term goal, but I fully believe that we'll eventually get there.
And the promotion relegation concept has massive collective bargaining agreement implications as well. It just does. I mean, you're a former player, but
and on the union.
And that's the reality of. I can't imagine it being in the NFL. That would be a large issue if there was even a possibility for another league. So I think it's I agree with Clark. I think I would never say never, but I think it's unlikely.
All right, another question for Taylor. I remember in 2010 talking with Mike Sorber in St. Louis. He was an assistant on the men's national team, and I asked him where was the next great generation of players, the guys who were going to follow Donovan.
He definitely didn't say me, I can tell you that.
I don't think your name came up.
I don't think it did.
But Sorber was surprisingly pessimistic. He said, we've got all these millions of kids playing soccer in America, but what do? They have a midweek practice in which they touch the ball for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then one game on the weekend. And so you develop what Sorber described as the prototypical American player. Very fit, very tenacious, never gives up, but doesn't have the ingenuity or creativity on the ball that you see in South American countries where you're constantly playing soccer, where there's constantly games going on. Do you agree with that critique?
No.
Okay, and why not? What do you see different?
Well, I mean, I look at the way the academy system is set up in Major League Soccer right now. I would have given my right arm to be a part of that growing up. I grew up here. Thank goodness I grew up in a city that knew their soccer history very well, like St. Louis. But I've played with many players. Clint Dempsey had to drive 3.5 hours one way to get a quality soccer training. That doesn't exist anymore. Now, we can debate all we want about the quality of coaching and who's coaching and all that, but the infrastructure now of where you're at a Seattle Sounders, New England Revolution, FC Dallas, for those that don't know, look at the youth system FC Dallas has. I mean, it's easily in the top 3 of Major League Soccer for the quality of players they're producing. But what is it? They show up at training. There's the carrot hanging in front of them. This is what you can have. It wasn't like that here. Yeah, you go play for Scott Gallagher. Okay, then what? The pinnacle was St. Louis University, and I don't say that out of disrespect, but that isn't the pinnacle. The pinnacle is Major League Soccer and going to play for the national team. And that's where, and if Mike was here, I would tell him the same thing. The infrastructure in this country has changed in the last 5 years since I've quit playing, and the way it's going, and the ex-players that are going to go into that and coach these players, I don't agree with it. It's going to come. It takes time. It takes the right infrastructure, and I think the MLS Academy system is a good base. Scott Gallagher is a wonderful club that does exactly what it's going to do. I just don't believe it.
Anybody else?
I mean, I guess I'm also interested. I think, like Taylor says, the MLS academies are growing, and they have this incentive to produce good young players that can help with their senior team, and maybe some of them they'll sell to Europe. Maybe some of them will stay.
Yep.
I also think that from a media perspective, because there's so many games on TV now from around the world, that kids who might choose at a certain age to play a different sport in the past, like because they thought they could make a ton of money in the NFL or
that's changed.
In the NBA, they can now see all the time that there are guys in the U.S., in Europe, in every country essentially, making very good money to play professional soccer. And for kids who that might be a big incentive to make a ton of money, I think seeing all these games on television helps with that.
Yeah, I would add one of the. I agree with the comments. I would say one thing that, as a kind of a goal, or it's really a challenge that in the process of the player development is getting better coaching for the 6 to 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're not good today, but it's when you're Greg. I use Greg Berhalter, the current coach of Columbus, as the best example. He plays, goes to Europe for a year to coach, but he comes back, and the monetary proposition is you coach at the pro level because of the money. But trying to find a way to make it financially work for really good instructors at the 6 to 12, which we haven't been able to do quite yet across the footprint. The league, I think, clearly the MLS teams can do that, and that's a huge advantage to your point. But if we can do that across the country, and find a way to do that, that will help us. That will propel the development of a player well beyond the current process that we have. It's very challenging, but in the MLS teams, and for that matter, all of the pro, Division 1, 2, and 3, all help that. When you see that on a map, there's a lot of locations, if you will. So that really helps. But and once again, just going to that 6 to 12, that instructor, because that's a very different dynamic. It's a teaching mode. It's not. If you're Greg Berhalter in that example, you got to win games or you're out. And so he cares about development only to a point, because he cares about his paycheck too, and that's just the reality of it. So.
And Michael, just to add, one thing I'd like to see change is this pay-for-play system. You know, I was a good baseball player. I got on the Kansas City Royals radar junior year of Legion. I paid $250 to play the highest level baseball. When I hear kids are playing the highest level, they're paying $4,000, $5,000.
Upper middle class sport at that.
You're not going to get the kid that can go play basketball instead, the Chris Paul of the world.
But to balance that, and Clark, you can jump in, because there's several, your team in particular, but there's several MLS teams that.
Well, and that's
at the development academy level.
That's why MLS is my favorite. But we only got 19 right now, right? So now what do we do? What do we do for the St. Louis's of the world and that thing? But that's why I love the MLS way, because it's like, no, you're good enough. I don't care what your economic background is. We want you on your team. We want to develop you. You just got to get here for training is basically your only pay.
Yeah, just to add some more color to those comments, MLS has encouraged teams to build youth systems for about the last 6 years, and that's about when Dallas got going on it. And we were very fortunate to have a former player named Oscar Pareja who took that role within our organization to develop our academy system. We started out with an under-18 and an under-16 group, fully scholarshiped. We cover everything. It's a pretty significant investment. And for a long time, I wondered where it was going. And we've since expanded, and now we have 5,000 kids in our youth system. 2/3 of them are boys. Every one of those boys, no matter what age they are, is dreaming about growing up and becoming a professional player for FC Dallas. And many of them have. We've signed about a dozen from our youth system up to the pro team. And this past weekend, we had a game on Sunday, and we've had some injury problems. We had 2 of these young men start. A third would have started, but he was injured. And we had a couple more on the bench. So that they made up almost a third of the 18 that we took to that game. And the 2 players who started, one of them, it was their first start ever at the attacking mid position, and the other was a defensive mid who had a handful of games. They were 2 of our best players on the field. So I reflect some of the conversations that we were having as a league even a year ago, where we were all wondering, okay, are we really going to start producing players? And boom, I'm seeing it live and in color now. And a lot of that is because of the quality of our youth system, which I totally credit to Oscar Pareja, who, by the way, for those who don't know, is now our head coach. So he had tremendous confidence in these kids. He knew they could do it. And since he's the guy that gets to make the decision in terms of who's on the field, he's putting them out there and letting them learn on the job, and they're doing a great job.
Well, and that's a byproduct of the salary cap, and those players don't count on your salary cap, so now it forces the issue of producing young players.
All right. 3 more questions, and then I want to open it up to the audience questions. First of all, for each of you, you were the czar of FIFA for a day and could make a single rule change to make soccer a better sport. What would it be?
Well, I'll start. I would. I think that it's doable. The clock at the end of the extra time, you should put it on the screen. If there's the time or the clock in general for the referee, when he wants to stop it, he just stops it, and it's the full 90. It's doable. The technology's there. That's one I think would end this mystery at the end of the games. Is 4 minutes, a minimum of 4, and then it goes to 6 because of something else, and there's all the squabbling. That's one I would do.
All right.
KTRS St. Louis.
I'll jump in so I don't lose all the good ones. Because I was going to mention the clock. I totally agree with Dan. But I think I would add probably a couple referees and position them standing next to each goal to watch what goes on in the penalty area. You know, whether it's a corner kick or a free kick, the amount of contact that goes on in there that we're asking really one guy to see is unrealistic. And I had a bad call.
I was just going to say, it's not ironic that you lost last weekend due to the...
It should have been a penalty kick. It absolutely was a penalty kick, and instead he got...
We'll ask you 2 weeks from now and see what your next answer is.
I would want there to...
Wait, hold on. Didn't you run for FIFA president?
I did run for FIFA president, and actually they've adopted a few of the things I put out there. Getting a woman on the FIFA executive committee finally, after so many years of that not being the case. Goal line technology is now in play. It will be in effect at this World Cup. I would like to see the offside rule changed so that there would have to be daylight between the attacker and the defender for there to be. You should like this.
I would have had 200 more goals.
In other words, reward offense.
Yeah, you reward offense. It's so freaking hard to score a goal.
Right.
That
Reward offense.
There needs to be more.
Where were you?
Give a little more advantage to the attack.
You didn't need it.
Yeah, it's true. I was always a head offside. You know what I mean? The big head was always. His forehead was off. That's a real good question. I think 2 things need to be addressed in FIFA, so I don't know which one I would pick. One, diving. I think diving, the difference between diving and embellishment, I think if you punished a diver immediately and was a little bit more concrete with the punishment, I think players would stop. But the other one is racism. It's remarkable to me how FIFA has not addressed racism the way they should address racism. You look at the way Adam Silver addressed Donald Sterling and dealt with that. Racism has been in the sport. When I was in Germany, I tell the story to everyone. First time I ever experienced 35,000 people. We had a player from Mali and the entire stadium hooting and hollering, bananas on the field. It's been going on, and for the life of me, I can't figure out how in 2014 we can't fix that. So, and it's not a soccer-related thing, but soccer-related, it'd be diving and embellishment. Goes back to, and Clark's looking at me, winking. He's going to buy my dinner tonight because of last week's game. But
all right, then let's next to last question. You said that you think soccer is in a better position today than ice hockey. Within the next 25 years, assuming that it eclipses the NHL in popularity, which I think is a fair estimate to make. Can it ever, or not ever, can it within the next 25 years approach any of the big 3? The NBA, Major League Baseball, or the NFL in popularity? And I'm particularly interested in Clark's answer.
I am too. That's why I pointed to him.
Clark's got partners in the NFL who are, I think, starting to view the MLS as a potential competition in the future. And I think you must have had some interesting discussions at some of the league meetings about the role of MLS and Arthur Blank joining the cause.
We haven't had those discussions at the league level, but I think it's been interesting to see the other NFL owners join the league. The Kraft family's been a partner since day one, but Stan Kroenke joined about 10 years ago. Now we have Arthur Blank. Paul Allen is one of the partners involved in Seattle. So clearly a lot of NFL owners are putting their financial bet, if you will, with Major League Soccer. I personally believe that in the next 20 years it's one of the top three, which means one of the other sports that's currently top three has to go. And I'm not gonna conjecture as to
baseball.
Which one.
Not in this town.
I'm not gonna conjecture, but I just think the growth trajectory, the fan preference that young demographic, whether it's 12 to 24 or really 18 to 35 also, they're soccer fans. And as they continue to mature and get to the point where they can buy tickets and so forth, they're going to make the investment in being a soccer fan. So it's pretty easy for me to see that happening, hopefully in my lifetime.
I won't pile on, but the statistic that would bear that out is the average age of the viewer of the World Series last year was 57, 58. The average viewer, when you're doing your great broadcasting work, is
What's 12?
No, it's 36 or 37. That 20-year span is a very, very big, very, very important number.
Yeah, I think baseball is the one I would pick that soccer would pass of those three. And, you know, I don't know if it's inevitable, but I do think that to get to that point where soccer is in the big three, and I don't think it's not just MLS. And I think this is going to be something that all of soccer. And I think one of the challenges MLS is facing is because so many games are available from around the world now that the Premier League is also a competitor of MLS, and the Mexican League is a competitor of MLS. And I think that actually provides a good incentive for MLS to keep improving the quality of the play in the league, because people are going to make choices in what kind of soccer they want to watch. Right. But it's still all part of the growth of soccer.
Taylor?
I mean, these guys said it right. I mean, Clark, let me ask you, like in early 90s, did you guys think the NFL would be what it is now?
No, absolutely not. And my dad, who was so closely linked with the creation of the Super Bowl and naming the Super Bowl, I think it was about 25 years ago, he said, I had no idea how big that game would become. And that was 25 years ago. Look at what it is today. And I'm hopeful, obviously, being involved in the NFL, that the NFL continues to grow and prosper. But if you look at where soccer is and the opportunity it has, it is absolutely huge.
And you look at where baseball is. Baseball's on the decline, and anyone that wants to deny it, and look, by the way, I am a St. Louis Cardinals fan, but I'm just saying it's on a decline. Numbers don't lie. I believe in that, and I think soccer is 100% going to be knocking on the door quickly here.
All right, last question for me before I turn it over to the audience. Will the United States win a World Cup in your lifetime? If so, how? If not, why not? And let me begin with the senior member of the panel.
Will we win in my lifetime? Well, sure hope so. Look, I think we have to be realistic. I think we have to be focused on what's at hand. I do think, hopefully I'm around in 20 years, I think there is a fairly reasonable chance that we can win. There is something beyond the American spirit, just in a business way. If you don't build something, if you don't believe in it, you're just never going to get there. So I think we're through the pioneering spirit, but I do think we're in the kind of grinded out part of the process. And I am bullish. As I've said to many people, if I could invest in just soccer, plain soccer, as a stock, I would invest heavy in it. I think there's a lot of parts of the soccer landscape that are just bursting with growth. It will take some things, some things have to line up, and you got to get a little bit lucky. But all that aside, I think if you say in 20 years, I think it is doable, yes.
Mark?
I absolutely believe it's possible. I've had the pleasure of attending 8 World Cups, and hopefully we'll make a 9th this summer down in Brazil. And the U.S. has come a long ways over that time period in terms of the quality of our players. I'm going to touch on 2 things that we've mentioned on this panel tonight that I think will allow us to do it. First of all is slowly but surely our best athletes are starting to pick soccer. And when I was in college, thank goodness that didn't happen. I never would have played at SMU. But it's happening today. Guys who could be cornerbacks in the NFL or point guards in the NBA are deciding to stay with soccer, and that'll happen in bigger numbers as we go forward. You marry that with the academy system that all the MLS clubs have, and the academy system is actually bigger than just MLS, but they're getting the right kind of training, and they're getting it at the right age. And they're going to have a Division II or a Division III pro team to go play for between high school and maybe when they're ready to play for an MLS team. All of that infrastructure and development is going to let those guys become the best. And, hey, it's no secret the U.S. has the best athletes in the world, and we're going to get them trained, and we're going to have a team that can win the World Cup.
So in thinking about whether the U.S. can win the World Cup in the future, I point back to 2002, where in the past the U.S. came an uncalled goal line handball and red card that should have been called against Germany.
I remind Ballack every time I see
from being in a position in that game. The U.S. outplayed Germany.
Yep.
To be in a decent position to win that game up a man and face South Korea in a World Cup semifinal. A team that the U.S. could have beat in that World Cup semifinal. So I think tournaments do involve luck, both positive and, in this case, bad luck. But
luck also worked in their favor in the third game. They lost to Poland, and then the time goal.
Sure,
so
exactly.
Luck's a big part of that World Cup.
South Korea. Just saying that it wasn't actually that far away from being the U.S. in a World Cup semifinal and potentially a final 12 years ago. So why couldn't the U.S. win a World Cup if the country continues to improve in the sport and invest in the sport? There's some countries, great countries like, the Netherlands that have been in several World Cup finals and have never won. But in my lifetime, Spain has won a World Cup for the first time. France has won a World Cup for the first time.
Yep.
Why not the U.S.?
Taylor?
Well, you're talking to a guy that played against – I'll never forget this. I tell this story all the time. Grant's heard it 100 times. We're walking out against Argentina, and Messi, Riquelme, Verón, Crespo, everyone's holding hands. And I'll never forget, I looked at Jay DeMeritt, Ben Olsen, and I said, oh, we got these guys. And I remember after the game, meanwhile, I touched the ball 4 times that entire game. But I say that jokingly, but I also say that to Dan's point, why do it then? What are we doing? What are we sitting here talking about it for if we don't believe it? We all believe it. At some point it's going to happen.
And it also has the added virtue of being about the last thing in the world that the United States could plausibly be a plucky underdog, a Cinderella in.
For sure. I mean, you're talking Miracle on Ice times 6 million when we win the World Cup. But it's going to happen.
Well, good news. That's the takeaway. U.S. is going to win the World Cup before these people die.
Whoa.
All right. If anybody's got any questions, if you just want to up at the microphone here, and we will take your questions. Go ahead. Don't be shy. Welcome.
Good evening. Peter McKeith. I'm a professor of architecture here at Washington University. I'm so happy to see the brain trust of U.S. soccer here in St. Louis. It's just great. It's a mark of how far we've come. I went to undergraduate school at University of Virginia. I came up through Bruce Arena as my coach.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I knew that. But that begs my question, because I also was an assistant coach together with Bob Bradley and Dave Sarakin. And in a way, I just want to ask the question really about the state of coaching now in the United States. You said we could debate it quite a lot, but it is important to the infrastructure as much as, and it bears directly on the question of player development. So if we could have a round robin of state of U.S. coaching.
I'll just take a repeat and then maybe build on it. The infrastructure from 6 to 12 is, as I said, the biggest challenge. And I think we've got some plans in place, but I think in the next 10 years, if we get that right, I think the 20-year window of winning a World Cup is possible. But we also have some very talented coaches one of the things I get in this discussion with the coaching ranks, and they say, well, players, I like when they can get in a better environment in Europe, and the referees would be better if they went over there. And I always say, well, would you be a better coach if you were over there? And it's a fair and it's an unfair question because there just aren't that many opportunities for them over there. So that's one comment I would make. But the more important with the Bruce Arenas and the Bob Bradleys, and I had this discussion with them several times, and sometimes they're difficult conversations, but we can't really be relying on Bob and Bruce. We've got to be relying on the 25 to 30-year-old coach today that we can invest in and send them to Europe or Mexico. And let me tell you, it isn't like everybody in Europe's got it right. There's some very good technical coaches south of the border. The technique of a Mexican player is actually very good. And so we tend to think we've got a little bit of a European side of our thinking, but Brazil or Argentina, I actually think the league has a fairly good Argentine flavor in it, in the DNA currently of the coaching or the thought process. So we're trying to figure a way to get the 25 to 30-year-old that we think is a really promising young coach, make that investment, maybe is willing to make that sacrifice part. I use this example all the time with Bruce and Bob and everybody, but on college football, if you really want to be in coaching, you'll go work with Nick Saban on that staff for a year for nothing to learn the system, to learn about how he does it. We don't culturally quite have that. And I'm not suggesting that that's an easy decision for people to make, but there was a coach in this city, Mike Martz, who did that with the St. Louis Rams under Chuck Knox. He actually worked for a year basically for nothing and became really an offensive genius to some and an offensive nightmare to others, I suppose. But so it's a combination of, but the investment in the younger, that's taking nothing away from the great job that the Bruce and the Bobs and everybody and Dave and everybody have done, but the investment's got to be young for the duration, for the future.
The only thing I might add to that is the league is obviously focused on the issue, and we have a partnership with the French Federation where we're sending some of our young coaches over there to be trained. And I'll have to say I was initially skeptical about it, but listening to our guys come back with what they learned and what they saw that was different made a huge impact on them and is going to help us. I think the other thing is having a system like an MLS club where you have an under 18, an under 16, and an under 14 academy team, and we have pro-level coaches coaching those teams. And they're also coaching a style that is consistent with what the first team plays. And we have a curriculum that goes all the way down to the 6-year-old that's designed to produce a player who can play in that style. And I don't think that existed maybe even 6 or 10 years ago. So I think we're on our way. More work to be done, though.
All right. Next question.
Okay. I would like to thank you all for coming. My name is Megan. I'm an undergrad at UMSL. And I would really like to thank Taylor for all of the work that you do. My question was, you mentioned that 2/3 of the players in the Youth Academy are males, and we have a very young women's league, but we have the FIFA World Player of the Year playing in it. What do you think we need to do to get young girls in the United States to dream to be in this league? In WSL.
Well, let me back up. We do have a partnership with the ECNL, which is essentially a development academy on the girls' side. So I don't mind saying this, but the biggest challenge for NWSL is survival, and it's. I don't think the NWSL has an expense issue; it has a revenue issue. We just simply can't raise the revenue to sustain a model for a professional league other than the model that we have today. In that model, we pay the women's national team players under contract, and then we distribute 3 players per team. The Mexican Federation and the Canadian Federation do the same. And there's a salary cap, and it's a very low number. But I think we are doing a good job to encourage them. The number one thing we need to do is continue to try to win on the women's side. And so the years 15 and 16 are very important to us, with the Women's World Cup being in Canada and then the Olympics in 16. So we have to keep, I think, our status as a favorite, if you will, on the women's side. The aspirational side is huge. both on both sides of the gender aisle, but maybe a little more so on the women's side. And there's going to have to be a strong dose of patience, people willing to make the sacrifice early for the next generation. And we talk about that all the time to our players and to the players in NWSL.
A couple of things I would point out, too. I just finished writing a story on we have this project coming out at Sports Illustrated on the top 10 most significant goals in U.S. national team history. We had fun ranking them. One of them was Abby Wambach's goal in 2011 at the Women's World Cup. And if you look at the average attendance, home attendance for a U.S. women's team before that, in a couple years before that, and ever since that, that's been a huge turning point.
I can tell you, it was about 5,000. Today it's 16,000.
Yeah. And at least three players, I would argue, Wambach, Morgan, Solo, I would probably argue are as popular or more popular nationally than any U.S. men's player.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
And so I think the U.S. women's national team also still has that going in a way that NWSL doesn't quite yet.
I remember I had a friend who worked at the Women's Sports Federation, and she said the problem was you had to have women go out to support women's sports teams, and there wasn't that culture of women spectators the way there was with a men's league, and I don't know if that's going to change or not.
I have a comment on that, and Clark, help me, but I think the percentage of fans in MLS has changed quite a bit. I mean, the women are a higher percentage than they were 10 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen that in all sports.
Right.
And I know the NFL, it's a higher number than it was 20 years ago.
It's like 60-40 in the NFL, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, next.
Hey, Taylor, you said that there was a paradox if you can't say you're a soccer fan if you're not an MLS fan. Isn't that kind of patronizing to the 20,000 that went to Sacramento, or the 11,000 sellouts at the Indy 11, and those guys that go to watch the Lions PDL team every week? The elephant in the room for us is that our nearest MLS team's 4 hours away. You know, it's hard to get emotionally invested in a league where it's a 4 hours drive. What can we do as fans to bang our drum to get an MLS team here? Thank you.
We had 3 in the over-under for when we were going to get the St. Louis MLS question. Clark, you want to handle the...
Well, I'll take it. It was addressed to me. How many English fans would say they're not English national team fans would say they don't root for Liverpool and Glenn Johnson today? No. Right. I was going to elaborate what I meant. The moment there is a U.S. national team player on Sacramento or on St. Louis USL Pro, or that USL Pro player develops through Major League Soccer and comes up, what I meant was, how can you be a U.S. soccer fan and not be a fan of the club structure in the United States? That's what I'm saying. And then I would also say to you guys, how are you not? If St. Louis has a USL Pro team, right? So hear me out. So you're going to watch all those games and support it, which is damn right what you should do. But for the life of me, I don't understand how you can't be a Chicago Fire, Kansas Sporting KC, or Columbus Crew fan. I don't get that. So that's why I raised the question. And as long as we have this question, and as long as our rating is a 0.3 on ESPN and NBC, our salary cap's never going to go up. So we can argue all we want, but the argument I get is we don't get enough quality. We don't spend enough money on players, yet we're the fans. Watch the games on television. But what I meant by my comment was so many people are U.S. soccer fans, yet they're not fans of the U.S. club structure. That's what I meant by, the Sacramento 20,000 fans. I'll believe it. I love it, 20,000. I'll believe it in 2 years if they're still doing it and they're paying for 20,000 seats. But
Clark, to St.
Yeah.
Louis and their MLS chances long term?
Sure. I was introduced to soccer fans domestically here in St. Louis when SMU would come up here to play SLU. And I couldn't believe that we were playing in front of 2,000 or 3,000 people. This is back in the mid-'80s. I was used to, 50 to 100 coming out, and they were all relatives, back home. So I know there's a great fan base here in St. Louis for the sport of soccer. And I'll tell you, as an owner in the league, somebody who's been there since before day one, I'm absolutely shocked that there's not an MLS team in this market. And we've spent a lot of time over the years in different phases of the league talking about expansion. And for whatever reason, there's never been a group that really grabbed the bull by the horns here in St. Louis and tried to make it happen. And I certainly hope that'll change because I know the sport and the league would do extremely well here.
And that stadium would have to be downtown.
Pardon me 1 second. I'm about to tweet what he was saying there. That was newsworthy.
All right. Next question.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm an undergraduate student here, and if you can't tell, I'm from Atlanta. So I'm a big fan of Arthur Blank. I think it's great that we're getting an MLS team. And you guys all seemed together to comment that it was key that every team has its own stadium, or that's a big part of it. And in Atlanta, we're getting the brand new football stadium for the Falcons that they're going to share with the MLS team. And I was wondering why you guys, and if you could elaborate on why you think their own stadium is such a big deal. And just two comments I had. Like, number one is, if you have a football stadium that it's shared with, you're not limited on capacity. Like, if you look at what they do in Seattle, they can sell out a football stadium. If you build a soccer stadium by itself, you're limited. You're not going to build a new one anytime soon. And then second, it can potentially prevent some cities from getting a team. Like, you look at what's happening in Miami, that could be the deal breaker potentially.
So that I'm clear on your first question, is it specifically about the Atlanta stadium?
No, just in general, and perhaps specifically in Atlanta, but really in general, why do you think that it's so important for a team to have its own specific soccer stadium?
Yeah, sure. It's probably born out of our experience. When the league started, if you go back to the business plan that was written in 94 and 95, believe it or not, it had a line item for each team to build a $20 million soccer stadium. Well, as we were trying to round up enough investors to get the league off the ground, guess what we struck from the business plan? It was that $20 million line item, which, by the way, in today's dollars, that's laughable. That's about 10% of what it costs to build an MLS stadium. So we launched the league playing in big buildings, mostly football stadiums of one form or another. And we quickly realized that with our crowds, which initially were pretty good, but they were in the teens, low teens, there was no atmosphere and there was absolutely no supply demand on tickets. So there was no incentive for anybody to buy season tickets. And once we got into the sophomore slump in 98, 99, we didn't have a season ticket base, and our crowds, they just fell completely off a cliff. And we were forced, ironically, in Columbus, where we operated the Columbus Crew at the time, to do something because Ohio State kicked us out of the Horseshoe. They were going to renovate it. They were going to take the capacity from about 80,000 to over 100,000, and they couldn't have us playing soccer games while they did it. So we got forced in very short order to do something, and my dad made the bold move in the face of a lot of wind in his face to build the first soccer-specific stadium, Crew Stadium, and that really set the ball rolling. And then Phil Anschutz built what was the Home Depot Center, and we came back later and built what is now Toyota Stadium in Dallas, and I believe we'll be up to 14 MLS soccer-specific stadiums this year, and it's truly had a huge impact on the success and sustainability of the league. But as the league grows, now we're circling back. The best example is Seattle, where you have a tremendous fan base, and it's a good thing they're playing in that big stadium because a 20,000-seat stadium wouldn't do it. I hope the same thing happens in Atlanta, and it might. They might come out of the gates really strong, sell a bunch of season tickets, and have a sustainable fan base in the 30,000 range.
realizing that it's all a process and that new money's coming into the league and that, you can't have everything be totally perfect. Artificial turf fields are a problem in MLS. And that's what comes with playing in Seattle. It's what comes with playing in New England right now in those NFL stadiums. And one thing about Atlanta that I'm concerned about is the teams coming in and they're planning to put artificial turf in. I wish a way could be found around that eventually, and kind of hope that that's possible. I'm here in Portland actually may put grass in, but we'll see.
All right, next.
Hi, my name is Madison. I'm an undergrad at WashU as well. I had a question about the women's side of the game, actually. So we've heard a lot about the waves that have existed in the men's side, and those waves have absolutely existed as well on the women's side. I'm wondering, you mentioned, specifically Solo and Wambach and Morgan and players like that who really have gained so much attention nationally, but that support, unfortunately, while it may exist for the U.S. women's national team, it really doesn't exist for the professional league that exists today or the WPS that existed before. So I'm wondering what you see as the missing link there and how you see the support for the USWNT to kind of continue throughout to the professional league today, and hopefully that will continue in the future.
Yeah, I'll take it. I think it's TV or lack of exposure, and as I mentioned earlier, revenue. But I do want to mention in NWSL, we now have the Portland owner is an owner in NWSL, and now the Houston ownership group is an owner in NWSL. And Portland is the easiest to talk about, with the 11,000 season ticket base or average crowd. But I know when they play Seattle coming later in the year, I think it's relatively in a short span of time, it's already sold out. So I think it's going to take a different, committed ownership, not group, but the growth of that group. But we've got to be very patient. The model that we have today makes some sense. We struggled. In fact, we're going to have a call here shortly about our TV package for NWSL. I think I don't want to, blurb it out, but I think we'll be with Taylor's company, which we think is the best option that's available in terms of authenticity for our sport and our country. But I think it's patience. As I said, the women have to fulfill their role. There's no magic formula. I mean, it takes considerable money to do it, and I don't think our sport is really a whole lot different than a lot of other pro sports. If you said, there isn't a women's baseball league, there's not a women's hockey league, and yet I think sometimes the questions come, I'm not saying yours was, but in a pointed way, and once again, I use it as motivation, try to find that magic formula, but the realities are it's the marketplace, and you can't force a business into a marketplace. You have to nurture it and build it. And I think that's where we're at with it. And we're pretty pleased, but we're optimistic, but I think it's still on a slow growth plan.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Asim Takor, and I'm not an undergraduate here. My question's, I think primarily for Clark. We've been talking about TV ratings and the 0.3 that MLS is sort of currently at. From my understanding, a 0.3 now is worth far more than it was even a few years ago, given the nature of broadcast TV and people DVRing everything except for live sports. So I'd sort of a two-part question. Number one, how do you get the 0.3 to a 1.3? And number two, in the next broadcast deal for MLS, which is up fairly soon, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, do you go for more money and try to reinvest that into maybe more designated players or something, or do you just go for exposure?
If you say take me off the broadcast, we're not talking anymore.
Clearly, the TV ratings is an issue that Major League Soccer has struggled with, and going back a number of years, I think soccer in general struggled with that. We've seen a shift. It probably happened with the national team first, and then behind that, the English Premier League, the success they've had on Saturday mornings. It's clearly an area where we have to grow. I think the answer to one of your questions in terms of how you grow it is the product has to get better. And that's something we're focused on. A lot of us would like it to happen overnight, but we know it's not going to happen overnight. As I mentioned earlier, I think the important thing is that 5 years from now, you as a fan really know that it's better than it was 5 years ago. And we're going to keep doing that. And eventually you get to a level of play that looks pretty similar to what you're seeing on Saturday morning coming from the English Premier League. In terms of your other question about what's important, certainly the financial side of it's important because the financial side is what will allow us to invest more in the product. That's sort of a self-fulfilling loop, as you can understand. But the other part is the promotional side. It's something that we've struggled with. I don't want to say anything negative about those guys.
No, you want me to? I will.
Yeah.
Sure, though.
You can do that. But we've just got to do a better job of getting the networks that carry us to promote the games because it's shown in every sport that if you promote stuff, the eyeballs go up.
I think the new TV deal, when it's announced, which will be shortly, will be a step in the right direction regarding a lot of what all of us have concerns about, whether it's time slots, promotion, that kind of thing. What's interesting to me is this rating, and I haven't been in the world long enough, but Grant and I, again, if you haven't realized, we do a lot of our travels are in the same games. We have many beers arguing about this together. The rating system is a little off because of social media now. Because if you look at an English Premier League game, the rating can be a 0.5, yet 7 of the 10 topics trending are Premier League topics. And right now, companies like ESPN, Fox, NBC, media companies are trying to gauge how do you rate social media, how when you have a group of people come together. So ESPN is one that has told me throughout my learning this business that ratings is a little interesting right now because they can't quite figure out Facebook and Twitter. And to reiterate what Clark's talking about, every single television partner of Major League Soccer, how politically correct was that statement, should do much better with promotion, and I think the new TV deal will do that.
Next up.
Anthony Schneider, just a fan. My question is a FIFA question. We all know that Sepp Blatter said no, regardless of what happens with the investigations, they're going to keep, Qatar, they're going to keep it in 2022. They're going to keep it over there. So what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to stay in the summer, or they're going to actually try to move it to the winter? Is that even feasible from a commercial standpoint? Is that okay?
We'll let Dan take this one.
Okay. I was going to ask
I don't think anybody,
if you guys like the jerseys.
No, yeah. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that.
Oh, you can't.
I don't think anybody. I don't think. It would be
got?
Sepp's decision. Only be the executive committee. I've talked to Sneal many times about it, and he's very candid. I don't think anybody really knows.
Nobody knows with certainty.
Yeah.
Most likely scenario from people I talked to on the executive committee is November, December of 22. But Fox, who employs me, is going to have a huge problem with that because they own the right. They spent $500 million on them, and that's for a June World Cup. June, July.
Well, they're going to have a little.
No, they'll move the NFL games.
Yeah.
They've got a pretty good property in the NFL.
College football and the NFL are going on during November, December. So there's a lot that would have to happen to move that World Cup to them, but that's the most likely date I'm hearing.
And, of course, the bait and switch was during the bid, we were going to air condition the stadiums and have mist blowing, and then as soon as they won the bid, it was like, we can't have a tournament in the middle of the summer. That would be.
It is interesting.
I've said this. I've been on the record that the cooling the field, people laugh at, but the NFL sidelines are cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually doable.
It is.
So of all the crazy things that went on, people use that as an example. The reality is that one actually is workable.
I went to Qatar in September, and they actually have first-generation cooling technology right now in the team Al Sadd. They're one of their top teams, which I was on the field. It was pretty impressive. It was 107 degrees, and it didn't feel like it where I was. I came away from Qatar thinking that the issues of cooling were actually less of a problem than the human rights disaster of the way they treat their workers there. And since then, that has become something more publicly known and
is a problem.
And I think as a comment from a U.S. soccer perspective is we got to be focused on getting better on the field. The game's going to be there, and let's focus on 26, bringing it here. Because the rest of the stuff is a bunch of noise, really, in terms of we're not going to change the decision. So we have to find the best way to compete in 22, no matter if it's in November or if it's in June, and focus on 26.
You could have the U.S. national team just train in Dallas in the summer.
That's true.
All right, next up.
Hi, I want to thank you for the opportunity. First of all, that you gentlemen are here. This is a big deal. Be in St. Louis, non-MLS city, to have a panel like this is a big deal.
I agree.
There are some very influential people in the audience for St. Louis, and I'm a little older than most of you people on the panel. I'm a parent who has a child who's a player. I want this question particularly to Taylor, but also to Dan and to Clark. If you were a freshman at St. Louis U High and you were able to play for the academy, what would you do? Number one. The academy system developed upon the European system is very well grounded. We have 70 some odd academy teams, but only 20 or so MLS teams. We are trying to make tuition free for those other teams that can't afford to have tuition free. So pay to play is on the way out. There are people here who are working on that. It's not perfect, but we're trying. And I believe that in 2020, you have a chance to be a player at the world level. You're 14th, 15th, 14th, 13th, 16th in the world right now. And yes, it's not perfect, and we're not the EPL. Yes, I get up at 6 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday morning and watch the EPL. What would it do? What does the time of the season have to do with it as well for the MLS if they played, a season like the rest of the world? Would that have anything to do? So, particularly to Taylor, would you play? It's a difficult question, and the time of the season for the MLS versus the world in general. Thank you.
It's a great question because you're asking in a city where high school soccer is much better, if not the best in this country, than any other city in America. And I am very fortunate to call myself a St. Louis University high school alum, but to grow up here. But what I would do doesn't mean what you should do or anyone out there. It's based on each individual, because I will say this. I was told at age 12, 13, 14, 15 by my Scott Gallagher coach that if I play baseball and basketball, I'll never make it. St. Louis, and I know Dan Flynn works for U.S. Soccer. He also, and I can't believe you haven't said it, we've been here an hour and a half. He won a state championship in St. Louis. I didn't. Congrats, Dan.
He also won a national championship.
Yeah, but the state championship.
No, he won a national championship, just in case anybody didn't know.
But actually, Taylor's being a little shy. But his father was my teammate. It was
I know that.
Okay.
But I don't think it's a dilemma for the St. Louis parent because high school soccer is so good, and it's very important. But to say, for me to come out and say universally that every kid should do academy, that doesn't mean anything. That's not fair, because I would have chosen to play for my high school, and there would have been people in St. Louis that would have been very proud of that decision. There would have been people at U.S. Soccer that would have called my father and said, that's a bad decision. But I've actually had this discussion with Jurgen Klinsmann. You know what Jurgen would tell his son? It's based on his son. What does his son want to do? It's the head coach of the men's national team. So the academy system, while they're addressing it and dealing with the high school thing, that's the right situation in most parts of our country. High school soccer is not good enough. But if that kid makes the decision in St. Louis and he's good enough, I can guarantee he's going to play. Someone's going to find him in a city like this. But when you're in Nacogdoches, Texas, and you're Clint Dempsey, that's a bigger dilemma that this country is trying to address. They're not really concerned about St. Louis high school soccer and them choosing not to play for the Scott Gallaghers of the world. And I know the Scott Gallagher people are probably stuck with that dilemma because all of them grew up and played for St. Louis high school. So it's a difficult situation. But I would answer it this. It's based on each individual. And if you're good enough, they'll find you.
I would follow suit on that. I think it is up to the individual. I will say, because I get this question a lot, and Taylor and his dad, Tim, we've talked about this. But at the end of the day, in fact, I was asked to speak at St. Louis U High, and this question came up 2 or 3 times, and a couple of them pretty pointedly. But the position, if you keep doing the same thing, I'm not sure that's a real good formula to improve. And so, look, it took 2 or 3 years for the technical guys and gals at U.S. Soccer to kind of convince me and keep pushing. It's not perfect, and it is up to the individual. But we made a decision at U.S. Soccer, and I stand by that decision, that we had to find a way to change the landscape. We had to find a way to add some where you could channel the players, give them opportunities. You know, I don't hear the complaints from hockey families. I don't hear the complaints when baseball players want to go off and play single A instead of college soccer. So there's all these decision points along the way. I think high school is tough because it comes early. In your case, a freshman's really early if you're talking varsity. But so I think it's up to the individual. But from our perspective, it was not trying to fast forward. You can't skip. There's no steps to skip. But we're just trying to find a way to rearrange the landscape to give kids really an opportunity. That's really what it's about.
All right, thank you. Next question.
I just want to thank you for being here.
All right, and next question, and I think we're in stoppage time now, so let's leave it to who we've got in line. Nobody new in line. Go ahead, sir.
I can take the questions
Go ahead.
and ask you. All right, name's Mika Wangia, and just wanted to, first of all, congratulate just the MLS for the progress over the short period of time from a world standpoint. Originally, I'm from Kenya, grew up playing soccer. But just the progress in this country with the resources that have gone behind it, the organization has been tremendous. Question I have is regarding pretty much what is the MLS doing to assist or create resources for grassroots scouts? All right, so, I mean, you have this huge country with so many kids playing soccer. And, I mean, you can only, have 11 guys on a soccer field. So it's tough, but to get the best 11 guys, I think there has to be a thorough way to kind of identify those players. And so I just wanted to ask a question as to what resources the MLS has to assist grassroots scouting to get these players up, apart from the traditional combines and invitational kind of stuff.
Sure. Although you didn't ask, but I'll start with internationally because it's an issue we struggle with in Central and South America, where many of our players come from, many of our foreign players. And we've begun a process of investing in scouts in those markets. And scouts, we don't call them scouts, but that's effectively what they are. So that if a team is interested in trying to find an attacking midfielder who potentially could come from Central or South America, we have people to talk to who are on the ground and know the player pool. Clearly, in an MLS market, the team has pretty good coverage. For example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have so many teams that it's very rare that a kid will fall through the cracks. Although that's a very big city, and not every kid is playing what I'll call mainstream youth soccer. But I think in Dallas we do a pretty good job. But if you ask me the same thing about some markets, other markets in Texas, where we don't have teams, Austin, San Antonio, there's no doubt there are great players that are there that we don't know about, and it's something that we need to do a better job of. We've begun an affiliation with the USL, and many teams have partnered with them. Some of the MLS teams are going to have their own USL team, And that I think that'll help that scouting network, and that you'll have more coaches who are tied into a particular MLS team who can help them do that.
All right, thank you. Next question. Nice shirt.
Bad day for us.
You didn't have another option?
I got a couple out, actually. A couple of U.S. ones. This one, near and dear to my heart. My name is Nick. I'm an athletic trainer certified, and my question is actually directed more towards Taylor. With the concussion research coming out and a new survey to mothers worldwide, well, not worldwide, countrywide, about whether or not they would allow their child to play football, 30% say they would not.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think that those kids that are not going to be playing football, do you see them coming to
Are you talking gridiron American football?
Yes, gridiron American football.
Yeah.
Because I know myself, I've dealt with soccer, I've dealt with extreme sports, I've dealt with football, I've dealt with, you name it, I've been on the sideline for it. I myself probably wouldn't allow my child to play football because I know the risks that are involved, but I know the risks that are also involved in soccer and all the other sports. With football being so great or greater than the others, do you think the kids that would have played football could migrate to
They are
soccer?
migrating. They are migrating. For over the last 2 years, the numbers would support that. The question I have, my biggest concern, and with all due respect to everyone on the panel, I don't really care about safety for the pro athlete. My biggest concern is that I want our parents and our youth educated. So I don't want just parents making a decision saying, I'm not going to play gridiron American football so they can play soccer, and yet we're not educating them properly on heading techniques, proper technique, how many times you should head the ball. So that migration will happen. It's inevitable. But that puts the onus on the soccer culture to make sure that we're properly educated on the recognition and rehabilitation of traumatic brain injury.
And I just want to thank you personally because I've used your information from ThinkTaylor.org, and I've done my research, due diligence, and I've tried to educate kids what's going on with concussions and TBIs and, all the other CTE, everything like that.
Yep.
I just want to thank you personally.
You're welcome, and sorry about Crystal Palace.
All I can say is go Aston Villa.
Next up.
My name is Brendan. I'm an aspiring young athlete, and my question is directed towards Taylor. Recently, during the last summer, I tore my ACL. I missed out on our senior year of soccer at my high school, so I looked to turn towards the spring league as a way to rebound and find some coaches, pick me up, and move on to the next tier. But I didn't see anything around the St. Louis area. I'm wondering what has to happen next with the infrastructure to help save these kids that are dropping out of high school tiers due to injury, and if that will happen anytime soon.
Yeah. Sorry about the ACL. If you have a dream of playing, don't give it up. The greatest player I ever played with was a St. Louis guy by the name of Steve Ralston, and he sat on the bench. He went to Oakville High School, sat on the bench, junior and senior year. He ended up playing 400 professional games. So you got a dream, don't give it up. And that's all I could say. The infrastructure, that's a difficult question because for the spring of a high school soccer player that misses the club soccer, that's kind of what's being addressed right now, around other cities and other states on how to deal with that. But on a personal level, just don't give up the dream. You'll find it.
All right, next.
Hi, my name's Amy. I'm an undergrad at WashU and I'm a big MLS fan. I had a question. You guys mentioned this earlier.
Who's your club?
Red Bulls. I'm from
Wow. That's what you go with? All right. Clark, that's messed up.
I'm so sorry.
Rubbing a little salt in the wood.
But yeah, I had a question. You guys mentioned this earlier about FIFA, the video game. I know a lot of my friends who are big soccer fans who aren't soccer players kind of came to soccer through playing FIFA. They played the teams on the video game and ended up wanting to watch them on TV. So I was just wondering if you guys could kind of comment on that trend, if it really has been made a big impact on young soccer fans and the growing fan base and how, that can kind of...
It's the best video game ever. More importantly, because and everyone loses sight. There's a great article with Andrew Luck in GQ about his love for soccer, and he's a bad example because his dad was part of, the Houston Dynamo and San Jose Earthquakes, and he was always there. But when I've had conversations with Andrew about this, every single person he's ever played football with, they're all FIFA fans. One, because the games are so fun, they're quick and easy to play, where Madden takes 45 minutes to an hour. Right now, Dan Flynn's looking at me. He has no idea what I'm talking about because Dan's looking at me going, was that in television? Sorry.
Not cool.
But the other one is they all played soccer growing up. And that's what stuck out to me when Andrew Luck said that, because they all played. But then they became 6'5", 250 pounds as a 13, 14-year-old. Someone said they should be an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman or a linebacker. But they all grew up playing soccer, so they said, this is the most fun. And it's also the easiest game to gamble on amongst friends.
To your point, Taylor, I did a story on Andrew Luck a couple of years ago and asked him his favorite athlete. And Andrew Luck's favorite athlete is Clint Dempsey.
Yep.
A quick thing on FIFA. It was genius by FIFA to associate their name with this thing because it's the most positive thing that FIFA's ever had.
It's so true.
Yeah, people love FIFA. And also, I remember doing a story once when I covered basketball. I was talking to some NBA players. Bo Outlaw was an NBA guy who loved playing FIFA soccer, EA. And he kept going on and on. Luis Enrique, who was like the Bo Jackson Tecmo Bowl of...
No one's Bo Jackson, but it's close.
An amazing video game. He never seen Luis Enrique play. He just loved Luis Enrique because he was always controlling Luis Enrique. That was
But an important part of that is we have finally, in Major League Soccer, gotten on that game the right way, where the ratings are the correct. The players, I was not 6'5", 2006. I was 6'5" center back on FIFA. I don't think that was ever possible. But that's important because this grassroots game, where you create your own club, a lot of kids now in soccer cities, mainly Red Bulls, it's funny you bring that up, because I was doing an event in New York, and all of them are creating the New York Red Bulls to play in Champions League. And it's creating this unique ownership of their local club, which is really cool.
All right.
I think I'd make a comment because Clark and I had this discussion a couple of years ago. We were talking about is there any one thing that really drove the NFL popularity? And I think your comment at the time was fantasy football. And so those ancillary parts to the program, and I think FIFA, EA is a big part. It's another example. It's not totally apples to apple, but I do think it's a good example of what it can do for your sport.
Fantastic panel. Thank you guys for being here and doing this. Very interesting and good discussion. Longtime fan, intramural college all-star. So baseball is 3 hours long. American football is 3 hours and 15 minutes long. Hockey is like 2.5 hours long. Basketball, the last 60 seconds are 20 minutes long. Soccer is 45 minutes, 15-minute intermission, 45 minutes, so an hour and 45 minutes. And yet it ends in a tie at times. That's the one thing that I get teased about with my 52-year-old peers, that they call it a recess game because there's no winner. Do you guys have any changes that you think should take place?
I think it's a generational thing. I think that most of the younger generation has no issue with ties anymore, and I think that MLS had a shootout for the first couple of years. And I actually didn't have a big problem with that.
Come on.
Johan Cruyff, one of the greatest players of all time, played in the NASL, and he thought that the shootout was actually a good idea.
Because that was the only time during those games he ran. You're asking the wrong guy. I'd rather lose than tie. But I think it's a generation 100%.
Yeah, it probably is. Just by way of context, when the league started, we did have a shootout, and that was a carryover to some degree from the North American Soccer League.
And I was one of the guys that voted for that. And when Don Garber joined the league about 4 or 5 years in, he was not really a soccer guy, and he got some criticism for that. He came from the NFL. And so the hardcore fans really went after him on a number of issues that they didn't feel were authentic about MLS, and probably number one on that was the shootout. And so as part of his second-year platform, he said, we've got to get rid of the shootout, and that was the end of it. And I really don't see it coming back because soccer fans around the world accept a tie, and we all know that a tie game can be exciting.
I think the movement to 3 points for a victory a while back has really, I think, helped that as well. There's an incentive to go for the 3 points versus hang back for a point. You only get 2 for the wins.
The question that's still hanging in the air is whether Clark or Dan is going to open a Twitter account first.
No chance. No chance. They'll have to deal with Grant now.